Hey everybody, welcome to the videos. We're going to my final thoughts for week 5 of the NFL season over on Draftkings. But before we continue, as always, if you guys could just leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, consider hitting that subscribe button. It really helps me out. I really do appreciate it. And I do cover other sports as well, including the MLB and NASCAR. So if you guys are going to keep coming back to the channel, if you guys are going to be frequent visitors here, you might as well hit the subscribe button and turn the notification bell so you don't miss out whenever I post new videos. And if you want to follow me on social media, Pennell 16 on Twitter, CPenn16 over on IG. And if you really want to support my content over on Patreon, that's always much appreciated. You get access into the entire NFL DFS data sheet, and you can come to the Discord chat, and I also have my cheat sheet, my notes, and some other stuff on there as well. So if you're interested, links down below. If not, that's fine. Let's just dive into this week's final thoughts video. So as always, we'll start with the quarterback position, and there's a lot of ways you can go with the quarterback this week. It's mostly just going to depend on your roster construction, or if you're just using game stacks, like if you're using Jackson, you could pair him up with guys like Mark Andrews or Marquise Brown. Now, you don't really have to use Lamar Jackson with his wide receivers because he can do damage on the ground, which makes him fine to play naked, kind of like Kyler Murray, although I do like using DeAndre Hopkins with Kyler Murray. But guys, quarterbacks that are mobile, you can play them naked because they can get the job done by themselves. You don't always have to stack, and Lamar Jackson's one of those examples. But I do have some concerns with Lamar, considering he hasn't really practiced this week. He's dealing with a knee issue, and he's also had an illness pop up later in the week. So those aren't great signs, but assuming he's good to go, they're saying it's more of a precaution than anything. And if that's the case, and he's 100% good to go versus Cincinnati, he should have a pretty strong game. This is a team that's not that great defensively. They're 10th DVA versus the pass, but they can still get it up on the ground. They did last season, and Lamar Jackson did play very well versus Cincinnati last year. And the Ravens, they have a 31.5 implied team total at home. They're 12-point favorites. And I guess that could be another concern, is that they are 12-point favorites, so they might be able to let their foot off the gas a little bit at the end of the game, which could limit Lamar's upside. But if they hit that team total, I'd have to imagine the majority of that's coming from Lamar Jackson doing damage, whether it's through the air or on the ground. So I think he'll still be able to get his, although we could see RG3 come in late into the game. But assuming he's good to go, full go, I like Lamar Jackson quite a bit here. He should have one of his better games of the season, if not his best game of the season. Rushing yards per game are down a little bit at only 60 per game compared to 80 last season. He's also under 200 passing yards per game as well. But again, pretty solid matchup here versus Cincinnati, and it's Lamar Jackson. He can do wonders on the football field. So I definitely like Lamar if he's 100% good to go and that knee issue isn't going to bother him, because I could be concerned with him running the ball. If that knee issue is going to limit him running the ball, I don't want to pay nearly $8,000 for Lamar Jackson just strictly on passing stats. I need him to be able to run the ball, but I think he'll end up being okay on Sunday. Patrick Mahomes, 7,700. A bit pricey here. Doesn't really run like guys like Lamar Jackson or Kyler Murray, but we know what he can do with his arm. He's the best quarterback in football, and I have plenty of interest in the Chiefs. Now, I say the best quarterback in football. You can definitely make a case for Russell Wilson, too. Both fantastic quarterbacks. But overall, I'm going to say Patrick Mahomes is the best quarterback in football. There's a reason he's got like a $500 million contract. The guy is just absolutely insane. His arm talent is bar none. But anyway, Patrick Mahomes, love the Chiefs here. Have a team total above 33, which I believe is the highest I have seen all season. And this is a great matchup versus the Las Vegas Raiders. They struggle through the air, and they struggle on the ground, and the Chiefs have just so many good weapons to get the ball to. You got the best quarterback in football throwing the ball. You have a very talented running back who they drafted in the first round in Clyde Edwards-Helaire. You got Tyreek Hill, who can burn any single defender he faces. And you got Travis Kelce, the best tight end in football. You got some good secondary options and Sammy Watkins. You got McCole Hardman. You got Demarcus Robinson. It's really hard to stop this offense, because if you sell it to stop one of the guys, they'll just go to the other one. So you're just going to have to try to slow them down. You can't really stop them. You try to slow them down, and I can't really see the Raiders doing that. I mean, like I just mentioned, so many lead options. Now, I don't love them being 11.5-point favorites. If Las Vegas can't keep this game close, I think we see a lot of Clyde Edwards-Helaire to end this game, which I have a ton of interest in Helaire. I actually prefer him over the passing game in this game, which is kind of similar to what I'm just going to say about Dak Prescott, where I prefer Zeke over the passing game. But I still think these guys are fine in tournaments. You could also make a case for them in cash games as well. But I feel like in cash games, I'm probably going to stick to the guys like Matt Ryan, Teddy Bridgewater, maybe even Daniel Jones, just to save some money so I can spend up at other positions like running back and wide receiver, which are positions I kind of want to spend up more on. Now, there's some more value plays where we could maybe be able to get to a Watson, Prescott, Mahomes, Jackson, but just kind of depend on how we see how roster constructions goes, and I guess I'll go over that in my lineup building video on Saturday morning when I post that. But anyway, Patrick Mahomes, it's a very good matchup. I don't really have to tell you guys that Mahomes is a good play because he's always a good play. It's just a matter of if you can afford him. But the Raiders, they're 30th DVA versus the pass, allowing nearly 20 DraftKings points for any quarterbacks. But I don't really care about that. It's Mahomes. He can overcome any matchup. He balled out versus Baltimore, and this is certainly an easier matchup here versus Las Vegas. Then going down to Dak Prescott, 7,400, who has been amazing for fantasy purposes so far this season. And you can give a big thanks to the Dallas defense, or lack thereof of defense, for allowing him to have these huge games, because that defense keeps digging this team into holes where they have to throw the ball all game long. We saw that last week versus the Cleveland Browns, where they fell behind quite early in that game. Now, the Cowboys were leading, I believe, at one point very early on, but the Browns just poured it on, and that defense is just, it's awful. I mean, any team can put up points versus them. They're just giving up so many points to every single position, every single week. Now, the Giants, they're on a team I'm too concerned about them being in a hole here. So I think the Cowboys should be able to control this game, and I actually think we have a pretty big Zeke game here. I think he's going to get 20-plus carries on the ground. I don't really think Dak Prescott's going to have to throw the ball 50-plus times, which is what he's averaging this season. Like, if you're looking at Dak's numbers, he's averaging 50.25 pass attempts per season and over 400 passing yards per game. He also had over 500 passing yards last week as well. This team's also playing super fast at less than 20 seconds per play, which is by far the fastest in the league. And they have a 31.5 point implied team total. But them being 9-point favorites at home, I think they should be in control of this game. And I actually think we have a pretty big Zeke game. But I still think both parties here, the passing game and the run game, can both be successful here. With a 31.5 point implied team total, I think everyone's going to be able to eat a little bit. And Dak Prescott, I mean, he's got elite weapons to get the ball to. You got Amari Cooper, you got CeeDee Lamb, who looks incredible so far, Michael Gallup, you got Dalton Schultz, who's been looking pretty good in place of Blake Jarwin, and you got Zeke, who's also a capable pass catcher. I remember in week 3, I believe, he had 11 targets, and he's been getting plenty of targets this season, so there's no lack of options for Dak Prescott. And if this defense once again fails them and they're in a hole versus the Giants somehow, don't see that happening, but if they're somehow in a hole versus the Giants, I expect Dak Prescott to have a huge game, because the Giants just do not have that great of a defense. They're 24th DVA versus the pass, and I mean, there's just so many good weapons here for Dallas, and they're also at home as well. So definitely Dak. And he also starts at 425, so you can get a late game hammer there with Dak Prescott as well. And he's no stranger to scoring around 40 points this season. And then dropping down to the more of the mid-range here in the 6K range, we have Deshaun Watson, 6,900. Had his best game of the season last week versus Minnesota, and there's another good matchup here versus Jacksonville. They also got rid of Bill O'Brien, so I think there's going to be a little bit of a spark in this offense. It's not like the players changed, but I feel like just getting rid of Bill O'Brien just is going to have I don't know, I feel like it's going to be a little bit of rejuvenation there on the Texans, and I think Deshaun Watson should have a pretty good game here. Look, I know he doesn't have DeAndre Hopkins anymore, which is always going to limit his upside, but Will Fuller, he's capable of having a pretty good game, and he's been the wide receiver 1 here. And look, this is a team that's 32nd DVA versus the pass this season. They have not been good versus the pass, and they're also allowing over 22 DraftKings points per game to quarterbacks. And Deshaun Watson, I think he's going to have a pretty solid game here. They have a team total of nearly 30 this week. They're 5.5 point favorites at home with a 54 point over-under. If Jacksonville can keep this game close and it's back and forth, I think Deshaun Watson can have a pretty big game. Now, we know he has rushing upside, but this season so far, he hasn't really showed it. Only 14 rushing yards per game, which is below pretty much all these guys that I have listed. So that's a bit concerning, but I still think Deshaun Watson has plenty of upside at only 6,900. And now we have two really good, I think I said that right. Now we have two really good cash game options, and Matt Ryan and Teddy Bridgewater. I'm a big fan of this Atlanta-Carolina game. I think a lot of points are going to be scored. They're also playing in Atlanta in the Dome, which is always nice as well. You don't have to worry about weather. And Matt Ryan typically plays much better at home, and we only have a 1.5 point spread here and a 54 point over-under. I think this is going to be decently fast-paced, back and forth, and I'm looking forward to it, because there's a good amount of DFS options here, and it's very easy to stack this game up because not really anybody super expensive outside of Calvin Ridley. Calvin Ridley, I believe, is the highest priced wide receiver in the slate behind DeAndre Hopkins, but it's pretty easy to stack this game. You got Matt Ryan, you pair him up with Calvin Ridley. You could also look at some of the cheaper options. If Julio Jones is out, we'll look at that in a little bit when we move on to the wide receivers. But you got Hayden Hurst. Then you can run it back with someone like DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson, or you can even use Teddy Bridgewater, use his wide receivers, and run it back with one of the Atlanta options like a Hayden Hurst, a Calvin Ridley, a Russell Gage, or even a min-price Zacchaeus. So plenty of ways to stack this game up, and these guys are not that expensive. Like Ryan 6,100, Teddy Bridgewater 5,900. I feel like these guys are a little bit underpriced given the game environment here. So big fans of this game, and both these defenses, big fan of this game, and really both these defenses aren't that impressive. The Panthers are 26th DVA versus the pass, and the Falcons are 31st DVA versus the pass. So I like both these guys quite a bit. Heads up, I think I prefer Matt Ryan just because he grades out better for me in my projections, but not by much. It's very, very close. It's kind of a toss-up here. So if you need the extra $200, or if you want to use Panthers wide receivers over Atlanta wide receivers, it's just kind of a flip of the coin there. Although I will say Teddy Bridgewater has the better matchup. Atlanta has been so awful versus the pass this season. We just saw Aaron Rodgers light these guys up, but so far this year, they're 31st DVA versus the pass, allowing 35.5 DraftKings points per game to quarterbacks, over 350 passing yards per game, and over 3 passing touchdowns per game as well. Also giving up some rushing yards and rushing touchdowns too, which I think you can put most of that on Dak Prescott, where he was stealing some goal line touchdowns versus Atlanta. But like both these guys here, and definitely like that game for DFS purposes, I think my main lineup's probably going to have a decent amount of those guys in that game. So definitely like that game quite a bit. Then we have two YOLO punt options here in Daniel Jones and Kyle Allen. You'll never feel good about rostering any of these guys, but the value is there, and that's really all we're looking for. Trust me, I'd much prefer to get up to Teddy Bridgewater or Matt Ryan if you have to go cheap at quarterback, but these guys are fine in a pinch. Daniel Jones, this is mainly just getting a matchup here versus Dallas. They're 9-point dogs on the road. I expect them to be having to throw the ball quite a bit, and this defense has just been so bad. I mean, they're 25th DVA versus the pass, allowing 23.8 DraftKings points per game to quarterbacks, over 250 passing yards per game, nearly 3 passing touchdowns per game as well. So Daniel Jones at that price tag, I think he's fine. The Giants' offense this season has scored 3 offensive touchdowns, which is horrendous, but it's mainly a price play and a good matchup. You can easily pair him up with a guy like Darius Slayton, and you can run it back with some of the Cowboys wide receivers like Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup, CeeDee Lamb, and some of those guys as well. So I like the price on Daniel Jones, but that's pretty much about it. Then Kyle Allen, 4,100. The Washington football team announced they are benching Dwayne Haskins, which means Kyle Allen is now the quarterback for this team, which doesn't sound great. This is not a very good football team. They're not really a prolific offense in the slightest. Yeah, you got Terry McLaurin, but that's pretty much it. Antonio Gibson's had some flashes this year, but overall, it's a pretty disappointing team. And the only reason Kyle Allen's the quarterback here is because he knows the Ron Rivera system. But man, trust me, it feels really gross rostering Kyle Allen. So I understand if you want to skip on this, but to go 3x, he only needs about 12 points. And if Lamar Jackson goes 3x, you need about 24 points. So pretty much double. Look, it's kind of risky, but it's kind of not because he's basically min-price and you don't really need much to pay off. And if you're playing Kyle Allen, I have not built lineups yet, but you should be able to afford anybody you want, like Zeke. You should be able to get Amari Cooper, Calvin Ridley. It shouldn't be too much of an issue if you do play Kyle Allen. So just play around with your lineup, see what fits. But he's a fine punt player, but this is not a good matchup versus the Rams. And I do have plenty of interest in the Rams defense this week, but mainly a price play here with Kyle Allen. We'll move on to the running back position, and up top we have Zeke Elliott, which actually these guys are out of order. Let me fix that. So up top we do have Zeke Elliott, and I think there's 3 clear running backs you play in cash games this week. I actually think it's going to be a very chalky build. I think most people are going to go Zeke and Clyde Edwards-Helaire as your RB1 and RB2, and then I think most people plug in Mike Davis in the flex spot. Now, I do like James Robinson. I like Hunt. I could see Hunt making a case for him being in the RB2 spot or even your flex spot if you don't want to go all the way down to Mike Davis. But there's a lot of good running back spots or running back plays on this slate. But I do think those are going to be the 3 chalky guys. But Zeke, I kind of made my case for him when I was talking about Zach, or did I say Zach? Getting mixed up with Zeke. With Dak, they're 9-point favorites at home here going up against the Giants. This is not a very good defense. The Giants aren't a very good offense, so I could see them being in control of this game. And I think Zeke's going to he should have his best game of the season here versus the Giants. I think he finds the end zone once or twice. He should be involved in the passing game as well. If we're looking at his numbers this season, he's getting nearly 18 rushing attempts per game, only 68 rushing yards per game with 3.9 yards per carry. And the offensive line, certainly not as good as it used to be, but it's still Zeke. He's one of the best running backs in football. The volume's secure. We never have to worry about Zeke really losing touches. Now, I know last week, Tony Pollard, they're going to lose Tony Pollard a little bit, but Zeke he is the guy there. We know that. He's never going to lose his job. And the Giants are 11th DVA versus the run, but allowing 26.1 DraftKings points per game to running backs, and the Cowboys have one of the highest team totals on the slate. But I love what he's doing in the passing game. He's getting 7 targets per game right now, nearly 6 catches per game, a 15% target share, and 40 receiving yards per game as well. So I definitely like Zeke. He is my RB1 on this slate, and I feel like he's a cash game lock at this point. Then Clyde Edwards-Helaire at 6,800. Mentioned this a little bit when I was talking about Patrick Mahomes, but I love the Chiefs offense here, but I'm actually more in love with the run game here because they're 11.5 point favorites at home, which is always a good correlation for your running back. I think you can pair him up with the Chiefs defense, and I think that's actually a pretty good correlation play. But the Raiders have been awful versus the run so far this season. They're 30th DVOA versus the run, allowing nearly 40 Draftkings points per game to running backs, 114 rushing yards per game, nearly 2 rushing touchdowns per game. They're also getting killed through the air as well, allowing nearly 8 catches per game and 70 receiving yards. So Clyde Edwards-Helaire, he's a very talented running back. He's in pretty much the best offense in football. And I think he's in line for a pretty big game here. I love that price tag at 6,800. So he's another guy that kind of feels like a cash game lock for me. Then dropping down to James Robinson at 6,700. Feels a little weird paying nearly $7K for James Robinson, but this guy's been pretty good. I know we weren't expecting him to be this good heading into the season, but he's been pretty good. He's also involved in the passing game as well. If you're looking at his numbers through the air, I'm loving it. Only 4 targets per game, but 40 receiving yards per game. And also, he's going to be the main guy on the ground. 15 rushing attempts per game, 71 rushing yards, and nearly a rushing touchdown per game, and 4.8 yards per carry. I mean, these kind of numbers are kind of on par with Zeke for the most part. And he gets a great matchup here versus Houston, who have been absolutely awful versus the run this season, allowing 162 rushing yards per game, 1.5 rushing touchdowns per game, and their 29th DVA versus the run. So James Robinson, pretty much an all-around back here, and see him get the job done on the ground. He should see 20-plus touches here, whether it's on the ground or through the air, pretty much combined. So I think James Robinson's fine. 54 point over/under in this game, 5.5 point dogs on the road, but that's not big enough to make me shy away too much from the running back here. So James Robinson, 6,700. I think he's a pretty strong play. Kareem Hunt, 6,500. No Nick Chubb, so he is the RB1 on this team. You have Dearness Johnson as the backup, and both those guys actually had some pretty huge games versus Dallas. And I know Dearness Johnson was involved quite a bit, but don't forget Kareem Hunt was heading into that game with a groin injury, and he was really not playing too much. But Nick Chubb getting hurt, that obviously changed that scenario. And Kareem Hunt had a pretty good game, and with Kareem Hunt being the RB1, he should be in line for having a great stretch of weeks until Nick Chubb comes back, because we know how good Kareem Hunt is. He's one of the most talented running backs in the league, easily a top 10 running back. And this Browns offense has looked pretty darn good besides that Week 1 game versus Baltimore where they sucked in that game. But ever since then, they have improved. Stefanski's drawn up some really strong plays, and this team is just, they love to run the ball. And if it's working, they will have no problem just running the ball all game long, not letting Baker make mistakes. They're kind of using him as more of a game manager, it feels like at times, and pretty much just letting Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt do all the dirty work, and it's working. I mean, that duo was fantastic. Unfortunately, they're not going to be able to do that now for quite a few weeks because Nick Chubb is out, and I love that duo because Nick Chubb, he wears that defense down, then you throw in a fresh-legged Kareem Hunt who just dominates the defense at the end of the game. He's also using the passing game as well. But yeah, with no Nick Chubb, he is the clear RB1 here. Yeah, Dearness Johnson's going to get some work as well, but it's still Kareem Hunt. I mean, he's $6,500, and he's going to be the main guy. Yeah, I'm going to have some interest. You can't really look at these numbers because, again, he's been splitting with Nick Chubb, but he's actually had some pretty strong games even alongside Nick Chubb. So when you take him out of the equation, it's only getting a little bit better, and he's only $6,500. Now, the matchup versus the Colts, they've had one of the best defenses this season, so I don't think it's going to be a cakewalk here for Kareem Hunt. They're 50 DVA versus the run, only allowing 16.6 DraftKings points per game to running backs and 64 rushing yards per game. But it's still one of the most talented running backs in football. They're only 1-point dogs here at home, which I'm kind of surprised the Browns are dogs at home. I really thought they'd be like 1 or 2 or maybe even 3-point favorites. Apparently Vegas doesn't agree, and I'm not one to really bet against Vegas too much. And this should be a pretty close game, but Kareem Hunt, he's going to get the volume here. He's super talented. This offense has looked pretty good, so certainly will have some interest, although he feels a little bit more GPP to me than cash games just because of the matchup versus the Colts. And I'd rather play Mike Davis in cash games for $100 less, who's stepped right into that CMC role, and he's actually looked pretty darn good, and he's just heavily involved in the passing game each and every single week, which makes him super interesting every week, and he gets a great matchup here versus Atlanta. Again, I said I love this game for DFS purposes, only a 1.5-point spread, should be pretty back and forth, and Mike Davis, we know what we're going to get. We're going to get around 20-plus touches, and he's going to be heavily involved in the passing game as well. So if you're looking at his numbers this season, he's got a 16.7% target share, nearly 6 targets per game, but that's also including week 1 where look, CMC was there, and then so if you exclude that game, those numbers do go up, and he's just been heavily involved in the passing game, which is always great for a PPR site like Draftkings. Definitely boosts his floor, and we know Atlanta loves giving up receptions to running backs, and they're doing that once again this season. 8.5 catches per game to running backs, and 65 receiving yards per game, and nearly a receiving touchdown per game to running backs, and allowing nearly 30 Draftkings points per game to the position as well. So Mike Davis, one of my favorite plays on these slate, and I really love the trio and cash games of Zeke, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and Mike Davis quite a bit. Feel really good about that. All those guys are involved in the passing game, and they should all get around 20, if not more, touches. So big fans of all three of those guys, and I love Mike Davis. Josh Jacobs, 6,300. This is more of a tournament play just because game flow is not going to really work out too well for him, being an 11.5-point dog on the road versus Kansas City, and I really don't see their defense stopping them. But the way to beat KC for the Raiders is to pound the rock with Josh Jacobs and keep the ball out of Patrick Mahomes' hands. You do not win football games against the Chiefs by giving it to Patrick Mahomes and letting him work his magic. You want to keep the ball out of his hands, milk the clock, and make it a low-scoring game. That's your way of beating the Chiefs. And the Raiders love giving the ball to Josh Jacobs. They run the ball quite a bit. And I mean, he's averaging over 20 rushing attempts per game this season, only 75 rushing yards per game with a pretty gross 3.6 yards per carry. But this is a pretty soft matchup versus the Chiefs, and they gave up over 100 yards to Damian Harris last week. So I think Josh Jacobs can have some success here as well. They're 27th DVA versus the run, allowing 25 Draftkings points per game to running backs and over 100 rushing yards per game as well. So Jacobs, if the Raiders want to try to win this game, they're going to have to pound the rock here with Josh Jacobs. And he's a super talented running back. I'm a big Josh Jacobs fan. He's also getting 4 targets per game, which is way up from last year. So it's also nice as well. So Josh Jacobs, I like the price point, but he's better reserved for tournaments because game flow can really hurt his upside there. Then David Johnson, 5,200. I know he's old and dusty, but again, firing Bill O'Brien, it should put a jolt in this offense or this team because I know they weren't big fans of Bill O'Brien. And this is mainly just a matchup play here versus Jacksonville and a price play for the most part. He should get around 15 touches, and Jacksonville just got absolutely rocked by Joe Mixon last week, who was struggling to start the year. And David Johnson, I wouldn't say he's having a great season so far, so I could certainly see him having a pretty strong game versus Jacksonville, but he feels a little bit more GPP-ish than he does cash games, just because I think in cash games, you really just plug in Zeke, Elliott, and Mike Davis. But David Johnson's fine in tournaments, and they do have a team 12 of nearly 30, and they're also 5.5-point favorites at home, so it should work out well for David Johnson. I like that price point quite a bit. I'll move on to the wide receiver position, where we have plenty of good options once again. We'll start up top with Calvin Ridley at 7,500. It seems like Julio Jones is not going to play this week. If that's the case, Calvin Ridley should have a pretty good game here. And even if he does happen to play, Calvin Ridley has been the wide receiver one on this team so far. And he's pretty expensive, but again, I love this game for DFS purposes. He's killing it in the air yards department this season. An 8 out of 16.4, 658 air yards on the year, which is killing everybody by a wide margin. Nearly 9 targets per game, a touchdown per game. The guy just likes to score touchdowns, which is fine for me for DFS. And 90 receiving yards per game as well. So Calvin Ridley, good spot here versus Carolina. They're 26 DVA versus the pass. He's also got a pretty big wide receiver versus cornerback advantage according to PFF this week. So Calvin Ridley, you can sign me up for him even if Julio Jones happens to play. I think he's a fine pairing with with Matt Ryan, or just running it back with a Teddy Bridgewater Panther stack. And the cool thing is that 0-point game he had on Monday night should keep his ownership a little bit lower than it normally would, because a lot of people are game log watchers, especially casual players, and if they see a guy that's $7,500 got 0 points last week, they're probably just going to pass on that alone. So I don't think he's going to be low on. Most people are smart enough for that. Like I remember last year, Will Fuller, he was struggling all season. Oh, it was like a couple of weeks, struggling for the first few weeks. And he was like super chalk. I think it was like week 4, week 5 versus Atlanta, and he ended up scoring like 50 DraftKings points. And I feel like back in the day, he would not have been chalky, but people are getting pretty smart these days. But anyway, going down to Amari Cooper, 7,400. Again, just give me any Dallas wide receiver. I mean, usually 1 or 2 of these guys is going to have a pretty strong game. It's just a matter of picking which one. But Cooper, he is the safest option of the bunch. He is the high volume guy. He's coming off a huge game last week, but getting 12.25 targets per game, a 26% target share, nearly 10 catches per game, and over 100 receiving yards per game as well. And good matchup here versus the Giants. They are 24th DVA versus the pass, allowing nearly 40 DraftKings points per game to wide receivers. So Cooper, yeah, you can sign me up for all the Dallas Cowboys offensive pieces in this game. Doesn't really matter who you are. I like you quite a bit. Dalton Schultz, Cooper, Lamb, even Gallup, Zeke, Dak Prescott, all on my list this week. Tyreek Hill 6,900. I don't think I'd go there in cash games. I like the price tag, but he always feels a little bit more GPP for me just because he can be a little bit boom or bust. But when he booms, he goes boom. Like he can have a huge game, but this is a good spot versus Las Vegas, and he actually got a huge wide receiver versus cornerback advantage here according to PFF this week. It's one of the highest on the entire slate. There's also 38th DVA versus the pass, so I like Tyreek Hill, but he's more of a tournament option for me, especially with them being 11.5 point favorites. Will Fuller is kind of just your pairing with Deshaun Watson. He had a pretty good game last week. And I know there's always a bit of an injury risk when you roster Will Fuller, so just prepare for that tweet notification that he pulled his hamstring and he's going to be out for the rest of the game. So that's always the risk with Will Fuller. But he's a fine pairing with Deshaun Watson, and this Jacksonville defense is 32nd DVA versus the pass this season. DJ Moore 6,000 didn't really work out as chalk last week, but I'm back on board for this entire game, and DJ Moore should have a solid game. He's doing very well in the air yards department this season with a 42% market share of the team's air yards, which is actually down from, I believe, 49% last week, but it's still a pretty strong number. A 65% weighted opportunity share, a 23% target share, 8 targets per game. I think he's fine. This is a good matchup versus Atlanta. They're 31st DVA versus the pass, having over 200 receiving yards per game to the wide receiver position. So DJ Moore, I like him quite a bit alongside Robbie Anderson. CeeDee Lamb, again, that's just getting exposure to this Dallas Cowboys offense, and he's seeing 7 targets per game so far with nearly 80 receiving yards per game. So I think CeeDee Lamb's a pretty strong play. Robbie Anderson's a very similar play to DJ Moore, but I feel like I might prefer Anderson over DJ Moore this week. He's been playing a little bit better here, nearly 100 receiving yards per game, 7 catches per game, 8.5 targets per game, and a slightly higher target share as well at 25%. You would think he'd have the higher ADOT and more air yards than DJ Moore, but that's actually not the case. But both are good options here versus a very beatable Atlanta secondary. Deontay Johnson, he's back from the concussion, and this is mainly just a volume play because he was getting quite a bit of work when he was healthy. I mean, obviously he missed a week, but 23% target share, 55% weighted opportunity share, 7 targets per game, and I think he's fine for the 600 going up against the Philadelphia Eagles secondary. Should see some Darius Slay for sure, but I think he'll be fine for the price point. And now Darius Slayton, 4,800, he's probably my favorite wide receiver play on the slate when you factor in the price tag because I love using anybody versus the Dallas defense, especially wide receivers. We saw Odell Beckham Jr. have a huge game versus Dallas last week. And Slayton, he's no Odell Beckham, but only $4,800, you can sign me up for him. 9-point dogs on the road here. They should be passing the ball quite a bit. And I love this price tag. He's probably going to be pretty chalky, but it's going to be hard to get away from him. He's getting nearly 7 targets per game so far this year, in around 36% market share of the team's air yards. But this is mainly just, I'm all about the matchup here. They're 25th DVA versus the pass, having 53 DraftKings points per game to wide receivers, nearly 2.5 receiving touchdowns per game as well, and nearly 200 receiving yards. So great spot here for Darius Slayton, and I think he's an excellent option, pretty much a cash game lock. And then Zacchaeus here at 3,000. He's the bare minimum. He looked pretty strong on Monday. And now if Julio Jones misses, I mean, at $3,000, it's going to be hard to pass up that bare minimum price tag. And I want exposure to this game. And actually, if we look at his game log as last week, he actually caught 8 balls on 9 targets for 86 yards and scored 16.6 points. I'm not saying that's going to happen again, but the week before that, he actually had 4 catches on 6 targets for 8.1 points, and I would take that all day at 3,000. So I like this price tag quite a bit, and definitely a pretty nice salary relief play. And he's going to allow you to spend up for a quarterback or a running back if you want. So definitely don't mind Zacchaeus at only $3,000. Moving on to the tight end position, there's actually quite a few good tight end plays on this slate. If I left a couple of guys that you like off, there's chances are I probably like them. It's just similar to all these tight ends. And this video is getting pretty long, at nearly 30 minutes right now anyway. But anyway, we got the 4 studs here in George Kittle, Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, and Darren Waller. All are in pretty good spots here. George Kittle gets a pretty soft matchup versus Miami. He's coming off an absolutely monster outing where he had nearly 200 receiving yards, caught every single ball he had, almost had nearly 20 targets. Looked absolutely awesome. So he's certainly in play for me. You're kind of splitting hairs up top. I mean, George Kittle, one of the best tight ends in football. Travis Kelce, one of the best tight ends in football. Those are the tier 1 guys. Tier 2 is more so Mark Andrews and Darren Waller, but I mean, those are the guys too. Those are my favorite. They're the best pass catching options on their own teams. Like Mark Andrews, yeah, you got Marquise Brown, but I feel like Mark Andrews is a little bit safer. Darren Waller is definitely the safest receiving option. I was going to say wide receiver, but receiving option on the Las Vegas Raiders. And Travis Kelce and George Kittle, I mean, those guys are just super elite talents, but Looking at the matchup here for George Kittle, they're 28th DVA versus the pass, only allowing 8.8 DraftKings points per game to tight ends, but they haven't played a guy like George Kittle yet, so I think he is definitely in play. 10.5 targets per game, 9.5 catches per game. Yeah, I like George Kittle. Travis Kelce, 6,400 is just going up against Las Vegas. I know they've been good versus tight ends this season, but they have not faced Travis Kelce yet. And Travis Kelce tends to play pretty well versus the Las Vegas Raiders. So, yeah, I like both these guys, but I just don't typically like to spend up for tight ends. Mark Andrews, pretty good spot here versus Cincinnati, but only 5 targets per game so far, 3 catches per game. This is not a team that loves to pass the ball. They're going to run it as much as they possibly can, but in the air yards department, he's doing pretty good. 8 out of 13, 260 air yards, 25% market share of the team's air yards. So I like Mark Andrews. It's just, not really, I don't know. 6,200 for Mark Andrews seems a bit much. It does, but because $200 more, I can get Travis Kelce, and for $300, I can get Darren Waller. I'd probably rather play Darren Waller over Mark Andrews anyway, so he's fine for tournaments. Darren Waller, though, 5,900. We know the volume's going to be there. He's their best receiving option. He's getting nearly 10 targets per game so far, 25% market share of the team's air yards, a 61% weighted opportunity share. Matchup versus the Chiefs, they're actually first DVA versus the pass, but they're allowing 10 DraftKings points per the tight ends, which Darren Waller's a very good tight end. He should see close to double-digit targets, and I think he's going to be fine. The Raiders should be playing from behind as well, so it should be a pass-heavy game script. So Darren Waller should have a pretty solid game. Then Evan Engram, 4,600. I expect him to be the chalky tight end this week just because people are going to want exposure versus the Dallas defense. We saw what happened versus them last week. And they're allowing 18.4 DraftKings points per game to tight ends, 64 receiving yards per game, nearly a receiving touchdown. They're also 25th DVA versus the pass. So Evan Engram, 4,600. I feel like that's the guy you're going to be wanting to go in cash games. You'd also look at Logan Thomas for some cheap value at tight end as well. Also Chris Herndon. Or so even Hayden Hurst. But none of those guys really get me too excited. And then we'll end this off with the defenses. And really the only thing I can say for defenses is try to pick home favorites, or if they're not at home, at least try to get a favorite and with a decently low implied team total. So the Rams, they're not at home, but they're also 7.5 point favorites, only 19.5 in total against them, and it's also Cal Allen at quarterback. And the Steelers, they should have a pretty good game versus Philly, 18 point total for the Eagles. They're also at home, which is nice, and they're 7-point favorites. Chiefs, this would be a pretty solid correlation play with Clyde Edwards-Helaire. They're 11.5 point favorites at home, so they check pretty much every box there. They also had a pretty good game last week where they scored, I think, 20 DraftKings points. And the Texans, it's gross and a 54 point over-under, but 24 point implied team total against them. They're also 5.5 point favorites at home, and they're only $2,600, so it's kind of just they fit the end of your lineup. But that's going to be it for this video, guys. I hope it was helpful. If it was, make sure you leave a like. If you're new to the channel, consider that subscribe button. It really helps me out. I really do appreciate that. I'll have my NASCAR video posted a little bit after I have this one posted. I'm going to record it tonight as I'm recording this at 2 in the morning. So sorry if my face or eyes look a little bit beat up. Just a little bit tired here. But I also have my lineup building video posted on Saturday. Or maybe Friday night. Maybe Friday night. But potentially Saturday morning. And then I'll have my core plays video posted on Saturday evening or Saturday night as well. So anyway, I'll see you guys then. Appreciate you guys watching. Follow me on social media. If you want some more content over on Patreon, feel free to do that as well. It's only $10 a month, which I think is pretty good. You get a lot of access to a bunch of data and my own personal opinions on all the guys that I like as well in the Discord chat where you can bug me all day. So, and with that being said, I'm going to head out of here. Hope you guys have a fantastic start to the weekend.